It's great to be here. A lot of us are talking about the future. The number one thing which I'm talking about in all my conversations these days is what is the future of Europe and the world looking like, and I'm sure all of us are having the same conversations with a lot of our friends and colleagues. And I've got about 20 minutes to tell you all about the future, which is not very long, so I'm going to talk fast, which is what I get paid to do for a living. I'm going to start by telling you a story about Elon Musk, and this will be the only story about Elon Musk, since I have slightly different lessons I take from my time working for him these days. One of them that I took from him, though, is he had a very interesting point of view when talking about the future. And I'm going to tell you about this moment. It was one of the strangest moments in my career. At the time I was working for Mark Zuckerberg, I was head of executive communications at Facebook, and I was living in San Francisco. And I'd flown down to Los Angeles for the day to interview for a job with Elon, to be head of communications at SpaceX, Elon's rocket company. And Elon was running a little late. He turned up 4.5 hours late, which is more than a little late for most people. And so I had time to game out every conceivable question he was going to ask me about how to run a communications strategy for the most exciting aerospace company in the world. And when he turned up, it turned out he didn't want to talk about any of that. He wanted to talk about this. This is not Earth. I know it looks like it, but it's actually something very different. This is a NASA artist depiction of what a future terraformed Mars looks like. And for those of you who weren't as big science fiction geeks as me growing up, terraforming is the process by which you turn an alien planet into something that's more Earth-like. This is what scientists reckon Mars might look like if over the course of thousands of years, you gave it an atmosphere, you gave it oceans, you turned it into something that humans could live on. And Elon wanted to talk all about the future of Mars because the question that he asked me as soon as we sat down was, what does the government of Mars look like? Which is not actually an interview question I had prepared for in advance. Luckily, as a communicator, I was able to blag my way through that conversation because I know a lot about science fiction. At the time, I thought that was a very strange question to ask for a job interview. He didn't actually want to talk about communications at all. He wanted to talk about the regulatory framework on another planet, which was very strange because there was a man who I knew didn't really like regulations on Earth, let alone other planets. But later, when I was on the plane back to Los Angeles, I thought that was a really, really clever question. And now I go around posing the same question to people. If Elon succeeds in 5% of his ambitions in his lifetime, which increasingly I think we probably hope he does, then certainly at some point this century, someone is going to have to answer that question. What does a government of Mars look like? In a world where you have human activity on a whole other world, economic activity, potentially companies carrying out different things. You have governments on a planet where there is currently no set of nations present. You're going to have to answer some fundamental questions about the future of human organization and how you manage people in a very, very different world, literally. This is the sort of question that on the face of it sounds absolutely ridiculous, and that's why I pose it, because generally when people hear that story, they think, wow, that's just an example of Elon being crazy. Not that we needed that many more examples. And yet, the future is going to pose increasingly more and more of these questions, which on the face of it sound sort of ridiculous. And yet, as leaders, as policymakers, as entrepreneurs, we are going to have to take them seriously. And in fact, our ability to be leaders and pioneers demands that we take them seriously before the rest of the world does. Because, of course, the next decade is going to be the most disruptive time in human history. There is a reason that all of us wake up these days, and if you're like me, you do the thing that you're not supposed to do. You immediately check your phone. You're not supposed to do that. It's very bad for you. But I immediately look at my phone, and I look at all the breaking news alerts and push notifications from overnight and what things happened in the world while you were sleeping. And it is a profoundly unsettling experience today for many of us in Europe who have grown up in a world with certain certainties about the world and how it should run, to see how quickly the world is transforming, and in many cases, not necessarily transforming in ways we would like. We are living through a confluence of technological, social, economic, political, geopolitical, and environmental transformations that will be profoundly disruptive in ways that are both sometimes good, but also profoundly disruptive, things that will demand that we change the way we operate. Now, we've all lived through this moment, of course, before, many, many times. And in the last 20 years, we all lived through a moment that is unparalleled in human history. And one of the fascinating things about humans is we have a tremendous capacity to not recognize when we are living through history, because you're just getting through that moment day by day. And yet we all lived through this. It was the arrival of the knowledge economy, the arrival of internet services that connected billions of people, software, data, analytics, all of those profoundly powerful tools that utterly transformed the world around us. And I thought it's useful, because we've all forgotten how disruptive that moment was, just to give you a very quick recap of how colossal and undermining that arrival of the knowledge revolution was for so many of the established ways of living and working. Of course, billions of people got access to supercomputers, the things we now all carry around in our pockets and our bags, which became essential infrastructure for freedom of expression and for the way we all live our lives and the way we all connect with our friends, the way we collaborate with our colleagues. That, of course, meant that technology became the critical driver of economic growth and the pillar on which the entire global economy is now built. That is where trillions of dollars of new economic value were created over the last decade. It was driven by technology. We, of course, know the geopolitical implications of that new set of technologies are absolutely immense, profoundly redefined the world order, and in many ways, all those breaking news alerts that you're seeing overnight these days, those are driven by a technological future that ended up disrupting many of the ways that world order has been constructed. And of course, one of the things that I spend a lot of time dealing with as somebody who advises partly on communications, and I think a lot about how people build reputation and navigate very complex societies in public, is we ended up with a whole new set of voices in our societies who are profoundly influential, and they are literally influencers. People with tens or hundreds of millions of followers who are vastly more authoritative than many of the traditional sources of authority in the world. And in many cases, traditional companies and leaders, including governments, failed to recognize that these were the voices who increasingly millions of people would turn to interpret that changing world, and they still struggle with it. Well, that was just the last revolution. That's what we all just lived through. What's going to happen in the next wave of disruption? Well, of course, at the heart of it is the arrival of artificial intelligence. I'm sure many folks today have been talking about AI, and there are so many applications today, it's almost hard to keep up with how quickly this technology is arriving across different parts of our economy and society. Millions of customer service inquiries we dealt with today in this country and around the world because of artificial intelligence. You have architects who are designing buildings with AI. You have folks who are using AI to go and connect with their customers and to serve them. 63% of the top 100 law firms in the UK, where I'm based, are all using generative AI now to serve their clients. On and on and on, you can look at all the applications of AI, and what this means is intelligence, the thing that has built the world around us, the thing that we all deliver through our jobs and through our lives, this is something that is now being applied to every single role and industry and is going to transform the world all over again in the same way that the first knowledge revolution did. Of course, it goes far beyond just the very basic office applications we think about. One of the biggest waves of transformation is going on right now, which you may not even see very closely because there is a whole unseen digital infrastructure that has literally powered those trillion-dollar companies, all that value I talked about. AI is being applied to the building of code and applications and those digital systems that will then allow us to make much faster progress and to create entirely new companies and new innovations. So we have AI systems today, for example, that outperform 93% of programmers who are literally so good they take part in programming competitions. That is something that's already here. Over the next several years, we're going to see a huge explosion of new digital infrastructure that, again, will really make innovation move at a much faster pace. Of course, it's not, again, just this narrow band of applications. And one of the themes I'm going to get to is just how cross-cutting the applications of AI are. This is a very famous picture now in the art world. This was the first piece of AI-generated art that won a Fine Arts Prize. This was less than 2 years ago. This was a piece of art by an artist in Colorado in the United States, Jason Allen. And at the time, it was very controversial because somebody had used AI modified art to go and win a traditional fine arts prize. But we're already into a new world where the applications are coming so fast that already attitudes are transforming in many ways towards things like this. The fact that we are now arriving in much more powerful systems that might generate photorealistic video from AI, things you can generate on your computer at home, things that are indistinguishable from real life, will again profoundly transform the nature of creativity over the next several years. But the applications just keep coming. I was in LA actually a couple of months ago, and there was a billboard on top of a building, and it said, ChatGPT, finish this building. And it was a construction site, and clearly whoever was building this building thought it was a sort of clever joke, because you've got these amazing generative AI tools, but hey, they can't do stuff in the real world. May I present construction robotics, which are arriving now at building sites all over the world. The average age of a construction worker in the United States is 43 years old. About a decade ago, it was about a decade younger. 80% of construction sites in the United States are behind schedule due to labor shortages. And yet you now have bricklaying robots that can lay 400 bricks an hour, 6 times faster than a human. You have machines that can carry pallets much heavier than anything a human could carry. You have on-site electric welding. And you have machines that can tie rebar, which is one of the most time-intensive parts of any construction site. It can tie a piece of rebar in 5.5 seconds, which is 8 times faster than a human. Robotics, combined with the arrival of thinking machines, will profoundly transform the nature of the world around us. And the applications keep coming. Imagine if you could apply that same intelligence and a new set of hardware to things as fundamental to our quality of life as, for example, healthcare and medicine. This is the Da Vinci. It's a $2 million surgical robot. It is essentially a remotely controlled machine which has limited intelligence, but it's representative of a new class of devices that will increasingly operate with far greater precision, that are shaped by these next-generation intelligent models and is being used to save lives right now. The Da Vinci carries out millions of surgeries every year in the United States and in Europe. And we have a pretty good idea that there are all sorts of other applications that could radically improve our quality of life. 100 years ago, the average life expectancy in the world was about 32.5 years. Think of how much extra life people literally got in 1 century because of access to new technology. In the UK, people's lifespan expanded in the last century by 41% on average. Imagine if we, or our children or our grandchildren, got an extra set of decades in their lives. How would that radically transform the nature of our society? How would that change their hopes and expectations for the world around them? And of course, the thing about technology that is fascinating, which again, people often miss, is it's not really about the hardware at all. It's not about the software. It is about the impact on the society around us and how it shapes us as human beings. And the cultural impact today is astonishing and is part of why things are so radically being disrupted today. This is a sports stadium in South Korea, absolutely filled to the brim with 70,000 people who are watching esports, which when I was a kid, and I was very uncool, I absolutely loved my esports back then. Before they were called that, it was just called computer gaming. Professional, competitive computer gaming is now a huge industry. About 2.5 billion people globally watch and play esports. By some analysts' expectations, it's the fastest growing entertainment industry. It is larger than Hollywood today, and potentially within the next couple of decades, it ends up as a more lucrative and more popular form of entertainment than even traditional sports. The world's most popular entertainment, of course, being soccer. And the scientific applications are so extraordinary that they absolutely will become central to many of the discussions I know we've already listened to in the hall today. This is a photo taken inside an experimental nuclear fusion reactor in China. For those who are well past their high school physics classes, fusion is the process which takes place within the core of our sun. Hydrogen is basically fused together and releases a huge amount of energy in the form of helium, and that might give us a form of power that is clean and essentially inexhaustible, because of course you can get hydrogen isotopes from seawater. It has been the holy grail of the energy industry for more than 70 years to build a working nuclear fusion reactor, which might fundamentally transform our entire global economy and, of course, our ability to deliver the quality of life that we all want to see for the world's people? Well, thanks to things such as AI, we are closer than ever. And by some very credible estimates from people I respect a lot, who are leaders in the field, we may be less than 5 years away from having the first commercial electricity delivered from nuclear fusion. AI is being used to control these reactors. That swirling colored ball you see inside there, that's plasma. It's about 100 million degrees Celsius. It is extraordinarily difficult to contain that ball of energy, considering that the core of Earth's sun is about 15 million degrees Celsius. So vast engineering challenge. AI is used to sculpt that plasma into energy-efficient configurations by altering the voltage of the magnetic coils in that reactor by about 10,000 times a second, something far beyond the ability of humans to do. What kind of future do we unlock if we have access to that kind of technology? Well, the futures we unlock, I suspect, are not going to be things we can easily predict. So I can tell you about a bunch of things I think are going to happen, and I'll probably be right as much as I'm wrong. But one of the lessons that is fundamental to our ability to navigate whatever comes next is to recognize that change will not be predictable. With self-driving cars already on the road, you can go and take a ride in the world's first commercial robo-taxi service. It's on the streets of San Francisco. It's only a matter of time before self-driving vehicles are all over the world. And what would that change, again, about our society? Well, one thing I suspect it will change radically is cities, which are, of course, right now the place where most of the world's population lives. In cities like London, which is one of the oldest megacities in the world, a city that has a disproportionate economic impact on the rest of the UK. London accounts for about 54% of our GDP in the UK. You might end up in a world where a lot of people actually don't want to live in cities anymore. If you can get up in the morning and instead of commuting through rush hour traffic, you can actually get into the back of a vehicle and go back to sleep, or watch Netflix, or do anything else, you might be prepared to live much further away from those city centers. How would that transform the real estate? How would that transform the businesses and the economies that have built themselves on the assumption that humans want to live in city centers? Already a challenge that lots of people have been facing since the global pandemic. In the United States, they have an even bigger problem as probably the most car-driven society in the world. About 70% of the average real estate in an American city is parking spaces, literally to fit all those cars. And 90% of the lifetime of the average vehicle in the United States, it's not being driven. It's sitting, doing nothing in one of those parking spaces. What would happen if we moved into a world of self-driving vehicles? Well, you might not need all those parking spaces. You might not need to own a car, because as soon as you get out of the car, it could drive off to serve somebody else. So it would change the notion of how we think about ownership of assets. A very different application. I'm a huge travel lover. I love traveling to places. Very excited to be here for the first time. One of the things that, of course, is a barrier to travel is air travel. How slow it is in many cases, how expensive it is, how polluting it is in many cases. Well, there's a whole new set of materials that are being developed today, because right now there are labs all over the world using AI to literally develop new materials, which we might be able to do new things with. So this is a photo inside a lab in a university in California, where they are literally using artificial intelligence to hunt for new types of crystal that might allow us to build very different machines. For example, very different batteries, very different computers. The one I'm most excited about is new metals that might allow us to create new types of aircraft. And there are scientific teams around the world working on this aircraft type now. This is a hypersonic aircraft. Hypersonic aircraft move at about 10 times the speed of sound. We don't have any manned hypersonic aircraft in the world. But if you could find the right combination of machines to build that aircraft and the engines, you could get from London to Sydney, Australia, in 90 minutes. How would that radically transform the nature of every single issue, every single company, and all the choices we make about how we think about community and identity, and who are your customers, and what are the markets you should be tapping? One single invention might fundamentally redefine everything, and it's by far from the only application of technology that's coming. So I'm going to close here with a set of quick lessons about things that I would take away from this very quick glimpse into some of the kaleidoscopic, interconnected futures that I think are arriving very rapidly for us now. The first is, you simply have to acknowledge that intelligence is going to reshape every job, every company, and every industry. When the knowledge revolution kicked off, you would expect that people would have seen just how transformative access to these tools would be. When the first real smartphone, the iPhone, came along in 2007, you would have thought people said having that supercomputer in your pocket would change the way you work and live. That's not so. There were lots of people who did not take it seriously. There was one CEO of a very prominent technology company who said that no serious worker would ever use an iPhone because they would never do business typing on a touch screen. At the time, everyone used BlackBerries and things which had physical keyboards. That guy did not remain CEO for very long. There's a whole bunch of people today who do not take the arrival of this new future seriously. They say, well, it's a lot of hype, and I use a little bit of AI maybe to summarize my PDFs, but it's sort of boring. You're probably not going to be winning the future if you think that. So the first thing we have to do is really recognize the scale of what is coming. The second thing is, if you do that, well, you've done the easy part. That's just the entry point. Adopting the tools is one of the easiest things you can do. Applying them to your business is one of the most straightforward parts of this whole thing. And I'm not saying they're actually that straightforward. They're just a lot easier than the really hard thing, which is recognizing that AI will transform the world and everything around us. In a future with any number of those technologies arriving in a world that's rapidly reconfiguring as a society, it's going to change how your customers, your clients, your investors, your partners, governments, every stakeholder you care about is going to have a different set of choices and preferences. That's the really hard part to prepare for. And so if you only think about AI in terms of, oh, I've got to get some sort of generative AI in to help me with my PDFs, or, oh my God, I've got to really think about how I speed up the way I code, sure, that will give you a little bit of a boost. But there's a much bigger opportunity, and there's a far vaster challenge arriving for our societies. And if you only do the tools part well, you will still lose. I suspect in this future where AI systems will be very, very good at quite specialist things, and probably better than humans at a lot of things, the leaders who are most resilient and have the richest careers are the people who will be good at more than one thing. They will be folks who in previous ages we would have called Renaissance thinkers or Renaissance leaders. Da Vinci, of course, was the canonical example of what that looked like. He was a statesman, an inventor, an artist, a politician, you name it, he did it. In his spare time, he even designed a helicopter. If you want to be competitive with AI machines of extraordinary intelligence, you probably need to have varied interests and skill sets which go beyond a single domain, because that's how you will deal with a future of vastly more complex outcomes and choices that these systems will give you. We talk about disruption all the time in terms of our national disruption strategy, our regional, our organizational one, but how much are you talking about and thinking about your own personal strategy for navigating the future? I'm telling you that everything about every industry, every role, all of our skills is going to be radically transformed over the next decade. Have you started preparing for what you're going to do in that future and how you continue to have a great career, how you deliver the quality of life that you want for yourself and for your family? That is the very urgent task that many serious people have yet to really begin taking seriously. And we're quite late in the day now for that kind of transformation. So this is one I spend a lot of time thinking about. And the last one I would say is, we have a choice of futures here. Nothing about the futures I've posited here and the technology suggests that there is just one future. Lots of people like to be very doom and gloom. Lots of people like to be hyper-optimistic. We are a complex world. We are complex people. We will probably do lots of things together. And I will close with a very quick thought experiment, because I like to do this every year, because I think it's a very useful way to contextualize the times we live in. Every year, I look back at what did the world look like 100 years ago, and I compare it to today. Well, 100 years ago, if you were born in 1925, this is the world you grew up in. The world's most popular car was the Ford Model T. You could get it in loads of colors. Actually, you could get it in one color, black. The world's most popular film was Ben-Hur. It was a silent film, just like all films. Lots of people were starting to complain in societies around the world that the world had gotten too crowded and we should probably build lots of walls to keep people out because the world population had reached 2 billion people. There were 83 sovereign countries in the world because most of the world lived under the rule of empires. Well, if you were born in 1925, this is the world that unfolded in your lifetime. You were 14 years old when the Second World War began, by most conventional historical estimates. You were 20 years old when the atomic age began and World War II came to an end. You were 33 years old when the first regular transatlantic flights began in 1958. You were 44 years old when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. You were 66 when the World Wide Web went online in 1991, which is the same year that the Soviet Union ended. And if you lived all the way to be the ripe old age of 100, you lived just long enough for intelligent machines to be on the cusp of delivering transformative change in the world. The rockets that are being tested now will one day probably take people to Mars, and all of us are facing the challenges of disruption here in Europe and around the world. It's a future which is extraordinarily exciting. It is deeply challenging. We all have the ability to shape it, and we must take it seriously. And so I'm very excited to share that quick glimpse of it with you today, and I hope you all go and have amazing futures. Thank you very much.